أهلا بكل الذين ينضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا مع ليلى الحسيني في بث حي ومباشر عبر WNZK راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on WNZK 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning Michigan with Layla Al-Husseini. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues with your host, Layla Al-Husseini.
I am Atif Abdel Jawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WZMV 700 AM. I'm Abdel Jawad reporting from Washington. Good morning. The world just said good riddance to a turbulent 2014 marked by terror violence, Ebola outbreaks, and the horrific series of airline disasters. Let's turn to the Middle East. From the war on ISIS to falling oil prices, the region had a dramatic year in 2014. Presidential elections in Egypt and Tunisia, U.S.-Iranian dialogue, Gulf states split with Qatar, the Syrian refugees' plight, and Iraq's new government are some of the events in 2014. In Libya and Yemen, fighting continues, and in Palestine, a renewed quest for statehood and end of occupation. So what the new year may carry to the region. In a moment, we'll be talking with a group of distinguished experts. From London, Hamdi Faragalla, a veteran BBC journalist. From Cairo, Hisham Qasim, publisher, senior editor, and writer. And from Wayne State University, Detroit, Tariq Ramadan, a historian and specialist in Arab and Islamic studies. And later in the program, we expect to be joined by an expert from Tunisia. Before we begin our discussion, I would like to invite our audience to call in with questions or comments. The number to call is 248-557-3300. That's 248-557-3300. I would like now to ask our three guests to assess 2014 in any area they choose, one or two most important events. And let's start with Hamdi Faragalla in London.
First, please allow me to start by wishing you and your listeners a very happy and prosperous New Year, and hopefully a peaceful one. Actually, looking back at the year gives a really very bleak view of events in the Middle East. Only yesterday we had heard from the London-based organization Observatory for Human Rights saying that the number of civilian victims in general as a result of the Syrian conflict has reached 76,000, the highest by far so far, out of which 18,000 of civilian and in excess of 3,500 of children. Absolutely very bleak picture indeed, and the rest of development within the region don't fare any better than that.
We'll get back to the Syrian issue in a moment, but let's turn to Hisham Qasim in Cairo.
Well, probably I would, after wishing everybody a Happy New Year, say the most positive development was the political process in Tunisia. Tunisia is in a position, in many ways, politically, demographically, geographically, to have a success story and to more or less jumpstart the transition to democracy, as opposed to many other countries, its neighboring Libya or the situation in Egypt or other parts. So the way the process has gone there gives hope and the possibility that eventually things are going to start evolving in the right direction. The worst part of it was the declaration of Daesh that they cut a strip of land and decided to call it the Islamic State, and the savagery that we have seen from them. It was not something that was unexpected. We're looking at a region that is torn by ethnic conflicts, religious divides, and it has been in the hands of dictators, and with the collapse of those regimes, the outbreak of such conflicts was expected, but we saw it at its ugliest.
Mr. Ramadan in Detroit.
Well, I tend to agree with both speakers before me, Hisham and also Faragallah, about the sort of the trends that we're seeing, and the hope for Tunisia, at least, as the sort of maybe singular model for which other states can sort of hope to achieve at some point in their political sort of careers. I think that I think one of the sort of subsequent, maybe inadvertent subsequent results of events in 2014 was the reshifting of alliances between states, both regional and extra-regional actors, that we probably would not have considered in the past. But the formation of ISIS has undoubtedly created new orientations, new political alliances between very unlikely characters. The United States and Iran, Iraqi forces, the Peshmerga, and Bashar al-Assad, along with the United States, the coalition forces of Jordan, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. That is something to undoubtedly pay attention to in the year 2015, and how those alliances pan out, and also what happens to Daesh at both a political and military level. The political transition occurring in Yemen are also something to look out for as well. I doubt Saudi Arabia would be content with allowing for a healthy Zaidi-led state in their backyard, and this might be a distraction away from which they view as sort of being allied to and tied with Iran. But I doubt they'd be okay with allowing a regime, a healthy-led regime in Yemen to maintain power and authority in that area. So I think those are two things at least to look out for in 2015. The massive human toll as a result of both the Syrian civil war and Daesh's campaigns in Iraq are obviously incredible tragedies. So that obviously cannot be looked over. That's one of the most largest and incredible tragedies of 2014.
That's great. We have several issues to tackle here. Let me go back to Mr. Faragallah in London. He talked about the horrific toll of civilians in Syria. And what do you think should be done about that? I mean, the UN itself has proposed a ceasefire in certain regions, and that doesn't seem to be working either.
In my opinion, the complacency of the international community led by the United States that brought us to where we are now. Now the United States committed itself sending forces to the region for the third time in about 3 decades. Had the West forged a coherent plan with all players taking active part in it, we wouldn't have reached what we are in now. Please allow me to draw the attention to the fact that Daesh not only flourished in Syria, but extended its sphere to western and northern Iraq, and they overrun the second biggest Iraqi town, that is the city of Mosul, with a population around 3 million people in no time, as a result of failed policies of the former Iraqi Prime Minister, Mr. Maliki. The military forces, with incredible and formidable military hardware, collapsed like a pack of cards. Now we are getting into a situation that hasn't been before. Sphere of ISIS has extended to a wider area, bringing back practices that relate to medieval time. Allow me to finish my point by referring to one thing. It's absolutely incredible that women in our time now are sold as servants and for sex and other purposes by the ISIS organization. Some of them even are Sunni, belonging to the same, and a lot of them are the Yazidi sect, the Kurdish Yazidi sect in northern Iraq.
Mr. Qasim, in Cairo, you talked about a positive trend or event in Tunisia, and as you know, Tunisia and Egypt have been described as parallels, maybe because they were, the first in the so-called Arab Spring. But how much impact the success in Tunisia might have on other uprisings or changes such as in Egypt or elsewhere?
Well, okay, first I just want to mention, I'll get back to the previous point about the security situation in the region. And, since 1956, the United States has basically provided a security regime for the region. It's backing off. Whether this policy is here to stay or it's something temporary for the remaining time of the Obama administration, we're not sure. But the thing that is clear is that a regional security system has to be built. We cannot continue to be consumers of security. The region needs to start providing its own security regime. So we knew sooner or later it was going to happen, and this is now the position that the United States is taking. It's refusing any military interventions for good or bad. Europe and the NATO are basically again saying we're sick and tired of this region that needs to be provided with security. So this is an issue that has to be addressed. As for Egypt and Tunisia, I think the best thing about Tunisia is that the global community was getting a little weary with Arab Spring. There were too much expectations. It was very unrealistic from the start for people like me who live 3 minutes away from Tahrir Square. So I was an eyewitness to what was happening. I was aware of the political vacuum that was evolving in Egypt. There was no Mandela. It was clear this is a populist uprising without any leaders, and that it was going to face problems. It was going to stumble definitely on the way. But this is not how the world saw it. The world saw the Arab Spring in a very romantic manner. They didn't see the poverty belt surrounding Cairo that could have turned the uprising in Egypt into a disaster. When you have a city of 20 million, 10 million of them in that poverty belt surrounding it live below the poverty belt. With the collapse of security, we could have had a massacre. How that did not happen is a miracle. So the romantic outlook made people, once the stumbling began and civil wars began to break out in different parts, to think that this was a mistake. The region should have stayed as it was under the control of dictators, that Arabs are genetically incapable of living under democratic rule. So Tunisia is a relief in that sense. But the impact of Tunisia on Egypt is practically impossible. We're talking here about a country of 90 million. Education is far better in Tunisia. Poverty is much higher in Egypt. the security services and the military in Egypt are far more powerful. They're not going to go away that easily. There is more a clear now conflict between the different security services in the country, and that's facing a problem. And these are matters that, Tunisia did not face. So I think the process in every Arab country is going to be a completely different ball game. What we're looking at in Libya, that will need foreign intervention, probably Egyptian, to stabilize the situation, or in Syria and Iraq, or basically we're looking at the epicenter of a regional war. So in that sense, Tunisia gives hope, is symbolic, but I don't think it can have an impact on other processes to the democratization of the region.
We'll be back after the break.
Are you going to start up a restaurant or a grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Najee Abood at 248-442-9292. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Najee Abood now, 248-442-9292. New Concept Products and Designs, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. For more information, visit newconceptproducts.com. 248-442-9292. It's never too early to get your child on the right track. From their first words to first grade, Dreamy Children's Center in Troy works closely with parents to provide an experience that goes beyond early education. The highly qualified and experienced staff use a variety of programs that can help nurture important personality traits like responsibility, independence, problem solving, motivation, and respect. They also have educational programs ranging from preschooling for infants, toddlers, transitional toddlers, and pre-K to Montessori-approved programs and bilingual curriculums for young children. They're open from 6 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., can provide breakfast, lunch, and dinner with snacks in between, and can also arrange for after-school pickup. Dreamy Children's Center in Troy is located at 37373 DeQuinder, just above 16 Mile Road, and can be found on Facebook at Dreamy Children's Center. Ask about the free preschool program. Call today, 248-680-9170, 248-680-9170.
I am Atif Abdel Jawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WVMV 700 AM. Welcome back to our discussion of the 2014 events in the Middle East with some distinguished experts on the Middle East. From Cairo, we have Hisham Qasim, publisher, senior editor, and writer. From Wayne State University, Detroit, we have Tariq Ramadan, a historian and specialist in Arab and Islamic studies. And from London, we have Hamdi Faragallah, a veteran BBC journalist. Now, I want to turn to Mr. Ramadan. You alluded to the situation in Yemen, and some analysts believe that maybe the best way to deal with the situation in Yemen and perhaps other places in the Middle East is just to let the region split up, Yemen be north and south. And those analysts believe that eventually, upon political and economic maturity in the future, like what happened in Europe, those split up countries would probably get back to unity. What do you think about that?
Well, at this point, I think it's really difficult to predict the future sort of political future of Yemen. I think that we've seen that essentially anything is possible in the Middle East over the past several years. Is it possible for a reunification in the near future? Sure, it's happened once, so there's obviously a precedent set for that, for the reassembling of the state. But at this point, it's very difficult. I mean, it's in a very transitional period right now. It's a fragmented, failing collapse state, similar to what we've seen in Iraq, maybe Syria, and Libya. So what's happening in Yemen is undoubtedly connected to some of the larger political currents and trends that we're witnessing across the region, not just in Yemen, but across the Middle East and North Africa.
Right. Mr. Faraghallah, I want to get back to the point you made about the failure of the international community in Syria. And I may notice here that a lot of people in the Middle East tend to place the blame on other parties other than themselves. And my question to you is, what role do you think the Arab League should have taken, could have taken? Was it a mistake that the Arab League kicked out the Syrian government out of the League and thereby losing any kind of influence over the events in Syria?
One would very much have hoped so, but it isn't the case. I do not think and I do not believe it would have made any difference at all, because the situation was determined on the ground. Linked to the reference to earlier one, I'll come back to the Arab League again, but linked to the previous discussion on Yemen and that of Tunisia, really the democracy is not a romantic notion, but it's a practice on the ground. Most of the regime, and this applies and has some relevance to events throughout the year 2014, most of the regimes in the region were ruling with absolute authority, if not dictatorship. The structures of the states were false, absolutely false. Once the regime collapsed, there had been no institution to carry out the process into a smoother and harmonious transition into democracy. Definitely the taken power in Tunisia of the new president, Sisi, who swore oath of allegiance only a couple of days ago, in the 4 years of transition, is absolutely positive step. And I would probably think, maybe invariant with your speaker from Cairo, that probably Tunisian voters in general have benefited from some dynamics within the region. For example, for them really to turn their back slightly to any Islamic tendency connected parties or movement has some significance to it. Coming back again to the Yemen situation before we move into the Arab League, the situation in Yemen is very dangerous indeed, and it ushers a very important trend, that is the expansion of the Iranian influence far beyond its sort of territory, known territory in the past. We started with Lebanon, moved into Syria, and very much into Iraq, and now into Yemen through the Houthis. The Houthis now sweeping large swathes of the country, and it may not be far-fetched that they would have control over Bab al-Mandab, the important bottleneck that controls the access between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. The Arab League, Dr. Gawad, is absolutely impotent organization. It has no teeth. You know how we go about things. We always paper over crack. We haven't got, again, because the individual constituency that makes organization viable and strong, such as the European community, the NATO alliance, or any similar organization. It's not there. It's only getting together organization in tribal fashion, and we all okay, and we'll agree or we disagree. But it isn't the case. I don't think it would have made any difference at all. In only absence of number one, there is fragmentation in each individual country. How do you expect them collectively to take such a strong step and influence events on the ground in other countries? I think the most the Arab League can do is to exercise influence and lobby with international players such as European Community and United States of America, and probably through the United Nations.
I think I understand we have a caller on the line. If we do, please introduce yourself and go ahead, sir.
Happy New Year, gentlemen. This is Najib Habba, doctor. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you, and I want to salute all your distinguished guests, and I wish them Happy New Year in the same time. Doctor, about the ISIS, I do believe that they did not come by coincidence. They came in to fill a gap in the Middle East countries after the falling of a few dictators like Saddam Hussein of Iraq, Hafez al-Assad of Syria, and then Hosni Mubarak, and then Muammar Gaddafi, and then in Tunisia, Al-Abidin Bizaid. Doctor, I don't care if there is a GS or CS and IS. GS, Jewish state or Christian state or Islamic state. They come in to fill a gap of a certain thing. And ISIS came in after the falling of those dictators and what we call it Al-Rabi' al-Arabi. Doctor, my question is, Islamic State come in, okay, let's say I don't have no objection about this. They want to establish an Islamic State. But don't you think, doctor, if they are raising the flag of Islam, La ilaha illallah, don't you think they should treat their citizen, the new state, as they call themselves, treat their citizen equal right? What are they doing to the Yazidi and the Christian in those two countries? It's a massacre. It's genocide. It's another Holocaust against the minority in the Christian and the Yazidi, and they are pushing them to verdict to Islam by force, to pay al-jizya, or leave your home and leave all your property. Besides, doctor, the worst things, the rape of their women and selling the Yazidi, the Christian young virgin girls in the market. This is the 21st century. Don't you think those ISIS, they should look again to their paper, to their constitution? Shame on them, the Tatar and the Mughal, Genghis Khan or Holako. They never did this. This is the 21st century, and I want an answer, and thank you very much, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you. I wonder if Mr. Tariq Ramadan would like to comment or respond.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think that ISIS, at its core, undoubtedly the heads of ISIS and the top tier within the hierarchy that exists within the organization was not motivated by religion, and I don't think look at Islam as its sort of source of sort of political guidance. I mean, these are men who were disillusioned by the American invasion of Iraq in 2003. I mean, al-Baghdadi was a civilian interned at one of the major prisons in Iraq. His two top deputies, Abu Muslim al-Turkmani, whose name is Father Ahmad Abdullah al-Hayali, and Abu al-Anbari, were men who either served as intelligence officers in the Istikhbarat, the military intelligence, under Saddam Hussein, and or they worked in some military capacity in the army. And these are not men that were motivated by religion, I don't think at all. I think there's a political opportunism that is shown over the past year. And he makes a good point in that the two primary targets, the two nations in which they decided to engage in militarily, are two states that are essentially failed ones. Iraq, a fragmented, broken, decentralized state, incapable of defending its own borders or incapable of even protecting its own citizens. And then, of course, Syria, which has sort of acquired a similar fate over the past 3 years as its neighbor Iraq. It's little wonder they haven't gone into places like Jordan or Saudi Arabia, where they realize that they have much less potential for military or political sort of hegemony. But I don't think that they're rooted in what they're doing is not unlike some of the previous historical figures like, Genghis Khan or Hulagu. I mean, these men were terrible and brutal and engaged in campaigns that were just as bad, if not more vicious. But I don't think that the utilization of Islam is part of a process of politically instrumentalizing a series of ideological constructs and symbols that have wide appeal. And they realize that they have the largest, probably the most important sort of tool for recruiting is for the propagandizing of Islam as a cover for political objectives that they want to acquire. So I think that Islam is sort of, it's the cover, it's a tool, but it's essentially wielded by men who are not motivated by religion at all, but who are sort of disillusioned and became increasingly sort of politically radicalized as a result of events that have happened over the past 10 years or so.
After the break, we'll be joined by an expert from Tunisia.
Life for Relief and Development is a non-profit charity that has been providing humanitarian aid and development to people and communities regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background for over 22 years. When disaster occurs here or around the world, Life rushes to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. Life also has development projects that provide medical relief, water purification, educational programs, relief for orphans, and much more. Your help and support can greatly improve these efforts. All donations are tax deductible. For more information, please visit our website at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. That's lifeusa.org, 248-424-7493. Dr. Opada Al-Zuhaili is a diabetes and endocrinology specialist with over 12 years of experience in medical research dealing with diabetes patients. Dr. Zuhaili lectures in many American and Arab universities about the latest research and studies related to diabetes. Al-Zuhaili Medical Centers are fully equipped to provide you with the best in medical treatment. Whether Arabic or English, our staff of medical professionals speak your language and can provide for your comfort and care. You're always welcome at Al-Zuhaili Medical Centers. Please visit our Southfield location at 27207 Losser Road, and for appointments call 248-809-5988. That's 248-809-5988.
I am Atif Abdel Jawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WVMV 700 AM. Welcome back to our discussion of the 2014 events in the Middle East, and we are now joined by a distinguished guest from Tunisia, Professor Safwan Malouli from the Safakis University. Welcome, Professor Malouli, and would you please look back on 2014 and give us your assessment in terms of what's happening in Tunisia?
Can you listen to me? Yeah, are you listening to me?
Sir, you are on the air now, and I'm asking you to assess the developments that took place during 2014 in Tunisia.
Right. What I want to say here is, everyone talks about Tunisia as an exception, as your former guests were talking about. But all of this was not done out of nothing. I mean that there are reasons, and there had been reasons behind the special developments in Tunisia, specifically in 2014. Let me just, my talk is going to be divided into 3 short parts. One, I'll be talking about what happened exactly in 2014 in Tunisia in terms of political developments. And the second part, I'll be talking about the reasons behind that. And then I'll be finally talk about now what's going on or what should be done in Tunisia in 2015 onward. Starting from the 2014, there are 5 landmarks or 5 historical landmarks that happened in 2014. The first is January the 26th, 2014, whereby the Parliament of Tunisia ratified the new constitution by a drastic majority, which is a historical landmark in 2014 in my country. Then October the 26th, whereby the first parliamentary elections were organized in the country. November the 23rd, the first round of presidential elections. December the 21st, the second round of presidential elections. And finally, and we're not enough with 2014, December the 31st, we got the first specific transfer of power in the Arab world, whereby the newly elected president took power and the defeated, between inverted commas, president stepped down and left the castle, the presidential castle of Carthage, and the control of the new president. This is, roughly speaking, the historical events in relation with 2014. This is what happened in Tunisia. However, there are very important aspects that happened in between. Tunisia could have never reached that level of political progress, as it were, or that could not by no means reach that level of fame in the world without some important reasons behind that. I have divided them into 2 reasons, direct reasons for all of these developments in 2014 and indirect reasons. The direct reason behind all of that political development in Tunisia is something called the national dialogue. In fact, there was early 2014, there was a kind of problems and controversial issues in the country, and there were 4 institutions, 4 civil society institutions in Tunisia that gathered all the political parties over a table, on a table, and then they asked them to, I would say, to solve all these problems, having in mind the national consensus in the country. These 4 civil society institutions are the Lawyers Union, the Human Rights League, the Trade Union Organization, and as I said, the National Trade Union Organization, the Lawyers Union, the Human Rights League, and the Industrialists Union, the Business Union. These 4 institutions, these 4 civil society institutions were guiding and controlling what happened to be known now in Tunisia as the national consensus. In fact, through this national dialogue, and a lot of controversial issues were raised, and these controversial issues were at the end of the day solved by all the political parties, or let me say the majority of the political parties, especially the major political parties, and they have solved all the controversies in the country in terms of the tendency of the new elections and the tendency of the constitution. This is the direct reason behind what happened in Tunisia in 2014.
Okay, Professor Malouli, I know that you are going to stay with us only for a few more minutes. I just want to ask you now what a lot of people, maybe outside of Tunisia, are asking, and that is, they wonder if the election of President Sabsi is in fact a U-turn for Tunisia, given the history and the background of Mr. Sabsi. In a sense, similar to what is being said by some about the election of Egyptian President Sisi.
I would say here that the rules of the game have changed. Now we have a strong civil society. Now we have a strong media. Now we have a strong public mass, which is, let's say, controlling and which is following what is happening in the political scene. The election of Sibsi is a turning point, yes, in the history of Tunisia. But, democracy is a process. It's not a final point. People in Tunisia have to bear in mind that the moment that there are elections in the country, this is not the moment to applaud and to say that's the end. It is the starting point of a democratization process. It is a starting point for a kind of, I would say, democratic dialogue, whereby everyone has to take his or her responsibility to control the government, to control what is happening in the country, to participate, to work, and to build a new Tunisia different from an old one.
Before I let you go, I want you to touch on the question of what 2015 might carry to Tunisia, plus maybe the entire region as well.
I would say in Tunisia specifically, let me start with my country. In Tunisia, 2015 will be a very difficult year, specifically in terms of economy, in terms of socio-economic movement in Tunisia, because the country is suffering from a lot of economic problems. It would be tough, 2015. For the rest of the Arab world, for the rest of the MENA region, I would say also it would be a tough year, 2014, with what is happening now in Libya, what is still happening now in Syria. There is what I have heard is there is a kind of, I would say, social movement in Algeria. What is happening now in Egypt, whether the new governors in Egypt will be ready to control the potential revolts and riots here and there in Egypt. I would say 2014, yes, it has now moved on, but it's a starting point. Specifically, or starting from 2015, it is a starting point for a lot of unrest in the Middle East.
Professor Safwan Malouli of the Safakis University, thank you very much for joining us for those few minutes, and have a good day. We'll be back after the break.
Thanks.
Jumana Kayrus. You've seen her images on giant billboards across the metro. Jumana Kayrus. You've seen her images on buses across the city. Now get to know Jumana Kayrus.
Most people who sit in my office across from my desk are hurting on so many levels. One thing people do not know about medical malpractice is that the statute of limitation, meaning the time that you have to bring suit against a doctor, a hospital, is 2 years. In medical malpractice, that's a very, very short period of time. Not every lawyer is an advocate, but every lawyer should be an advocate.
Let Jumana Kayrus protect your rights. Call the law offices of Jumana Kayrus at 1-866-YOUR-RIGHTS, extension 100, or visit yourrights.com.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Dana, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziad.com. That's www.ziad.com. Ziad, quality products from our family to yours.
I am Atif Abdel Jawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM. Welcome back to our discussion of the 2014 events in the Middle East. We have a group of distinguished experts on the region from Wayne State University, Detroit. We have Tariq Ramadan, a historian and specialist in Arab and Islamic studies. From Cairo, Hisham Qasim, publisher, senior editor and writer. And from London, Hamdi Faragallah, a veteran BBC journalist. And gentlemen, now I want to turn to 2015. So what do you think 2015 may carry to the region with all the turmoil that is going on? Let's start with Hisham Qasim in Cairo.
Well, there's definitely going to be more turmoil. It's difficult to foresee an end to this turmoil in the next 5 years, or a complete end. It will vary from one place to the other. Again, how things evolve in Egypt is going to be quite important, because destabilized Egypt is going to have very negative consequences on the whole region. I'm optimistic, but on the long term, I don't think that the situation in Egypt can be reversed. You had just posed the question, is the election of Sibsi the beginning of a reversal of the process? Like some people say, the situation here in Egypt, I really don't think that there can be a reversal of the situation in spite of the difficult situation when it comes to human rights, the regular demonstrations taking place, the mass arrests, what looks from the outside as a very ugly scene. But for somebody to be able to concentrate power in his hand like Mubarak did is over. It's no longer a possibility. There are too many players now on the Egyptian scene, not necessarily all very positive. But nobody is going to be subdued by the other. When we look at 30 June, it was a process that basically involved the media, the Foreign Office, the judiciary, the police force, the military, the other, and the church. None of those is on the long term willing to play second years of relapsing into authoritarian rule is not something I see in Egypt.
Hisham, I know that you have a kind of affection for Libya since you spent a part of your childhood there. So how do you foresee developments? How do you think the situation could stabilize in Libya somehow?
I can't see this happening without an Egyptian clear military intervention. However, the problem is there are probably as many Egyptians in Libya as there are Libyans. Okay? And we've seen attacks happening on Egyptian workers in Libya in the recent months. However, since the outbreak of chaos in Libya, And there are regular reports coming that there is Egyptian involvement now. However, the Egyptian military and president continue to deny it, and I think it's the fear of a clash against Egyptian citizens living there. So it's a very difficult situation. The Emirates is contributing to the effort now, try and stabilize. And when I say stabilize, of course, I'm using shorthand. It's quite a complicated process, and they're taking sides against the militias. But short of an intervention, it's very difficult to see how Libya can be stabilized within the next 5 to maybe 10 years.
Yes, but would you think the Egyptian army would be effective given the fact that they are also preoccupied with violence or special operations in Sinai?
Well, okay. Well, the problem with the Egyptian military is that there were lots of people who believed in the past 10 years or so, the Egyptian military are becoming a military that's capable of regional deployment in the face of terrorists and militias. We know the war is over. There's never going to be a country-to-country war in the Middle East again. But the previous Minister of Defense insisted that the Egyptian military continue as that big monolithic military that will face a single country in a war. The effort is being made to quickly try and modernize it. However, it is going to take time. But it's inevitable that Egypt becomes the core of a new regional security regime capable of dealing with terrorism. As for the menace inside Egypt, of course, it's not easy. And in lots of cases, the attacks are taking place inside cities, and the military here is not the entity to deal with that as much as it's the intelligence and the security services to preempt such attacks. Sinai is not such a big problem because while it's nasty what's going on there, but again, the problem is here you have a military facing militants who are asymmetrical. If they were to grow in numbers and become anything like Daesh, and turn into something symmetrical, then it would be much easier to hunt them down. When you have a tank chasing 6 people up in the mountains, it's extremely ineffective. But once these 6 people become 600, then a tank can become a very dangerous weapon confronting them.
Let's turn to London, Mr. Hamdi Faragalla now, and I want you, Mr. Faragalla, to first, if you have any comment on the idea of Egyptian intervention in Libya, and then, of course, I want you then to give us your predictions for 2015.
To my opinion, from my point of view, I think Egypt would have committed a grave mistake if they directly involve themselves in the conflict in Libya or elsewhere in the Arab world. However, their role cannot be underestimated politically and otherwise, but not direct intervention. I don't think it will help the situation. The situation in Libya is absolutely chaotic in the extreme. The players themselves need to solve the situation among themselves with help from the Egyptian, yes, first and foremost, but from the wider Arab world and the international community as a whole. For the year 2015, I think facts on the ground indicate that we will witness further instability and further security deterioration throughout the region and further victimization throughout the region, and the aspect of terrorism would develop and evolve and take different shape, and it will not be restricted only to the region, but it will extend to the wider world. One of the points that needed to be borne in mind very much, that will probably feature very strongly in the year 2015, is the people trafficking. There will be stronger and more forceful attempts for traffickers to smuggle people from the Middle East region into Europe. only yesterday, a cargo ship supposed to carry livestock with about 500 people on it. The majority of them are Syrian and quite considerable number from the Kurds as well, have been spotted off the coast of Italy. This only comes a week after another cargo ship with no crew in it, left in its own device, was rescued by the Italian with 1,000 people on board. Amongst these, lots of children and women. So this trend is likely to feature strongly in the year 2015. However, the steps in Tunisia and the completion of the roadmap in Egypt, which one single strand left of it, that is the parliamentary election, hopefully will produce a stronger parliament that would observe, monitor and modify the executive power and create a sort of balanced arrangement, would be viewed as a positive thing. And I hope so that the media aspect, which we haven't touched on, that had been totally polarized in one direction or another, would perhaps follow a more credible editorial line.
Dr. Tariq Ramadan in Detroit, what do you think 2015 will carry for the region?
Like the two earlier distinguished guests said, I think increased care. I think we're going to see a continuation of some of the things we've seen in 2014. But there's a rapprochement that we're seeing between countries like Turkey and Iraq, between Qatar and the rest of the GCC states. So we might see a shift in policies. I don't know how this manifests itself in practical terms. We don't know what the outcome might be. But we know that it's likely, at least, that Bashar al-Assad becomes almost resurgent. As long as the coalition airstrikes continue to pound Daesh sites in both Iraq and Syria, the winner out of this will probably undoubtedly be Bashar al-Assad. He's been able to maintain authority, control cities in this sort of urban belt along the sort of western part of the country, Damascus, Hama, Homs, Ladakhiya, parts of Aleppo, under government control. And this has obviously caused some serious demographic issues, the swelling of urban centers. People are fleeing the countryside and heading over to the cities. So this is changing the demographic sort of dynamics in Syria. But he will be the winner as a result of the current war on Daesh. I think that a more coherent policy that stems from the recent reestablishment of diplomatic ties between the GCC states will maybe lead to more success on the battlefield. We're not really sure what's going to happen. I think that one thing that hasn't been touched upon today was the fate of the Palestinians. I think without a centrist sort of leftist election in Israel this year, I think that the Palestinians, if Mahmoud Abbas goes to the ICC, International Criminal Court, to file charges against top leading Israeli officials, and I think that the Israelis will respond with an even more brutal occupation, harsher restrictions on travel, and I think that the Palestinians will indeed suffer in 2015 if there are no changes in the political processes in Israel.
Well, thank you very much, all of you. Our guests from London, Hamdi Faragallah, a veteran BBC journalist; from Cairo, Hisham Qasim, publisher, senior editor and writer; and from Wayne State University, Detroit, Dr. Tariq Ramadan, a historian and a specialist in Arab and Islamic studies. And also we had from Tunisia, Professor Safwan